Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special Global Executive Forum brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association, LG Pro Victoria and LGiU Australia. It is a pleasure to have you with us. We are expecting quite a few more people to join us and expect they will do so as we get into the session. My name is Chris Eddy. It is my pleasure to be your moderator, co-moderator this evening with the lovely Catherine Arndt from the VLGA, who I'll introduce to you in just a second. But firstly, can I say, in the spirit of reconciliation, that the VLGA, LG Pro and LGiU Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'll very shortly introduce you to our terrific panel for this evening, but firstly, to say a few words of welcome and set the scene, the CEO of the VLGA, Catherine Arndt. Good evening, Catherine.
Good evening, Chris, and thank you, and good morning to our panelists and also guests who are joining us from the UK. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to what is the second global executive panel that we've run in partnership with LGiU Australia and also LG Pro Victoria. And I'm very pleased to acknowledge the president of LG Pro Victoria, Liana Thompson, who's in the room with us today also. And I'd like to acknowledge Andy Johnston, who is joining us from LGiU International, but is representing and can speak to LGiU Australia. I don't want to take up a lot of your time tonight because it's really about hearing from our esteemed panelists and finding out from across the globe what our councils, what our local governments are doing to support community wellbeing in what is an unprecedented time globally. And with that, Chris, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You mentioned Andy Johnson is with us from LGiU. And Andy, I'd like to invite you to say a few words, if you would like, to explain the role and the purpose of LGiU Australia.
Thanks very much, Chris, and Catherine, and thanks for helping to set up this meeting. Yeah, LGiU has been running in the UK for about 40 years now and has established itself in the local government landscape as a trusted provider of news and information for local authorities. In the UK, we're actually owned and run by our local authorities. A few years ago, about 5 years ago, we started to look internationally in terms of does the service that we provide have a potential audience in other countries, and are there opportunities to bring together the local government family, if you like, across those different countries. And we started in Australia just over a year ago. Timing was terrible, but nevertheless, we've got ourselves up to about 13 members. The latest ones to join, Port Macquarie Hastings, which was just last week, and then the week before, I think we had ACT Library join up. So we're beginning to establish a good solid membership within Australia, which is great. And this kind of event is exactly the sort of thing which we want to build into our whole programme, which is bringing together good practice in the UK and Ireland and Australia. And we had one of these events just before Christmas, which was great. And this one looks like it'll be excellent as well. Thank you.
So can I briefly introduce to you each member of our panel firstly? I'm delighted to have Cathy Henderson, the CEO of Moreland City Council in Melbourne in Victoria. Cathy has been in that role since December of 2019 and brings a distinguished leadership record in local government in New South Wales and Victoria. And Cathy has a strong background in community and aged care services and leading major organisational change. Welcome, Cathy. Linda Perrine is with us. Linda is the Director of City Planning at Hawkesbury City Council in New South Wales. With 30 years experience across local government, the not-for-profit and private sectors in New South Wales. Prior to her current role, Linda was the Chief of People and Culture for the Aged and Community Services Association and held executive roles at Bankstown and Parramatta City Councils. Welcome, Linda. And it is a delight to have from the other side of the world, literally, and the other side of the clock, Claire Symonds and Gail Clark from the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham in London. Now, Claire is the acting CEO, has been since last year, since pretty much when COVID broke out, actually, and substantively as the Deputy CEO and COO since October 2015. She's played a key leadership role in Barking and Dagenham's 2020 transformation program and has held previous senior roles in customer and commercial position at the boroughs of Barnet, Tower Hamlets and Bexley. I hope I've got all those right, Claire. Thank you. Welcome to you. And Gail Clark, last but not least, Director of Workforce Change, also from Barking and Dagenham. Gail leads the Human Resources and Organisational Development function there and has worked in the public sector in London for many years, including previous roles in, am I going to say this right, Slough and Redbridge. Did I get that correct? Excellent. Thank you. Welcome to you, Gail. So I'm going to start with you, Cathy, if that's okay with you. And I'll ask each of our panelists to set the scene for us, you know, where you are geographically for the benefit of others in the audience from other parts of Australia and around the world. And in relation to COVID, where you're at in that journey, because we're all at slightly different stages, I gather, and it'll be interesting to get a sense of that. Cathy, welcome and take it away.
Thanks so much, Chris, and what a pleasure it is to be on this discussion with people from around Australia and the UK. It's really fantastic. And I just want to acknowledge also that different people on this call will be in different stages of pandemic, I think, and really want to acknowledge that some of us have particular restrictions and some of us might have stronger restrictions as well. So well aware of that. I'm the CEO at Moreland City Council, which is a great place in the inner north of Melbourne. We have about 185,000 residents, and we see ourselves as one of the most culturally diverse municipalities in Greater Melbourne. So we're known over many decades for welcoming migrants and refugees, and in our 185,000 residents, over a third speak a language other than English at home. And I can see there might be former residents and also neighbours of Moreland in the crowd, which is great. So over a third of Moreland residents speak a language other than English at home. Our top languages other than English are Arabic, Greek, Urdu, which doesn't add up to 4. And we've got about 10,000 people who don't speak English well or don't speak English at all. So we're quite close to the CBD. We're about, the bit that's closest to the centre of Melbourne City is only about 5 kilometres away, very close. And parts of Moreland are very urban, cosmopolitan, high density living, hipsterish, really great coffee. That is very important to us in Melbourne. But we also have some wonderful other parts of the municipality where it's a bit more peaceful, where there's a lot more less density houses, and of course parks and reserves are very important to us. We don't have any beaches, we don't have any rivers, we love our creeks, and our tagline is one community proudly diverse. In terms of the pandemic in Victoria and Australia, I think we're all feeling very lucky and fortunate that we've come through the vast majority of the worst. And now it's very unusual that we have any cases outside of hotel quarantine at all in Australia. And in Victoria at the moment, we're not accepting any overseas flights, so we're not even getting those cases. So we're very lucky in that regard. Moreland Council, being in the northwest, inner northwest of Melbourne, and having very diverse community and having various degrees of advantage and disadvantage, we were amongst the hardest hit. We weren't the hardest hit municipalities in Melbourne, but we had many of our communities facing significant challenges. And we know, don't we, that the pandemic magnifies and has magnified existing social inequality. And so people that were already doing it hard have done it particularly hard during the pandemic. So for instance, in Moreland, we have a lot of people who worked in abattoirs worked in affected abattoirs, which was challenging. We have a lot of people with very large households, and we have a lot of people who simply couldn't afford to stop working in order to self-isolate. And that was challenging. And indeed, in the second lockdown in Melbourne, which was from around about, well, in Moreland, it started in June. We had a restricted area lockdown. So that was about June. It finished for Melbourne more or less October, November. We indeed had many households that were in quarantine. We had large households where every person was infected. There was a lot of work to do, both to support those infected, those in quarantine, and also to protect everyone else also. Pretty hard stuff, and I think we're all glad that we're where we're at right now. In terms of what that meant for Moreland, like all councils, we had to pivot really hard. We had to do new things. We had to do the old things differently. We had to stop doing a bunch of stuff. We had to find ways to survive without the bunch of stuff we couldn't do. Our mayor and councillors in Moreland were fantastic in saying, let's just do everything we can. We'll spend what we have to. The most important thing is the community. Some of the things that we did differently or did extra were funded by our Victorian state government. Some were funded by the federal government, our national Australian government, and other things we funded knowing we were going to have to make up the difference somehow in some way. In the first lockdown, which in Melbourne was from about March through to about May, we surveyed community organisations and health organisations in our area, and they told us one of the most important things we could do is not just sort of directly helping people, but actually coordinating the provision of support to make sure that all the different agencies and organisations and volunteers involved were not tripping each other up. So we put a lot of effort into building those networks and facilitating everybody communicating and joining in that way. Incredibly important, and will have lasting benefit after the pandemic, I think. Within council, we built a number of new services, ranging from delivering iPads so that people could get on the internet, to new home delivery services for the library, to a new navigation service where if people contacted us, we would make sure we put them in touch with the right, often complex services that they might need. And it was interesting to do that. We actually built on the skills of our aged care assessment team, our team who's very used to doing complex assessments of human needs. We built on their expertise, brought in new staff, and had a team of navigators to help people navigate the various both generous but also complicated opportunities for support that have existed during the pandemic. And sometimes not so generous as well, particularly for international students and refugees. And of course at Moreland, like all councils, we were funded to directly provide food and personal relief to those in isolation, which gave us a lot of direct contact with communities that we perhaps hadn't been directly in touch with before, which is a privilege and was, again, a lasting benefit, I think. In terms of engagement and communication, and I'm aware I've only got a few minutes more, it was clear that we both had to pass on important state and national public health messages, and it surprised me how much the community looked to us for those messages, looked to us for interpreting state restrictions. It was very interesting how they did that. And I also think that some of the less big picture social media criticisms which happen, which we all know as part of a thriving democracy, thriving community, that really did go down, I think, in favour of people just wanting information, just wanting to hear from us about where do we have to wear a mask, are we allowed to, how many hours a day are we allowed to go outside, where is the latest testing thing. And that's interesting, Karina in Tasmania saying that that was a similar experience. So that was a little bit surprising to me, and we took that really seriously, and we issued every day an update on where the state government testing stations were. We also had to promote our own services so that those that needed them would be able to reach them. So we increased our mass communication, and I'll talk in a moment, and I know time is tight, but we increased our communication staff and added on a whole team of people that were distributing leaflets. So we know that Some of our community can't access social media, so leaflets were important. We targeted it to particular areas. We targeted it even to particular housing types, in part, to try and reach people. We put a lot more resources into translating than we have before. So we were distributing stuff in multiple languages, not just with a line that says, if you want this translated, call this number. And that was really important for us, took resources, but again, that will change the way we do things in future. Now, we had all these services run by professional staff and important public services to promote, but we had to do more to reach hard-to-reach community groups. Our social media was really good for English-speaking social media users, but there's a whole cohort of people that are using social media in different languages. So we established a program called the Moreland Connectors, where we engaged trusted community members to share council messages with already engaged communities through their own closed forums. So that was through Facebook closed forums, through WhatsApp, through Viber, and through WeChat. We recruited through faith groups, through health services, through community agencies, and got 8 special people who volunteered to pass on important council messages in language, sometimes not in language, to a whole range of groups. So included, for instance, someone from the Vietnamese Buddhist community, an Urdu-speaking Pakistani Muslim communities had a community connected with us. We had both Lebanese Muslim communities connect with us and Lebanese Assyrian Chaldean Christians connect with us. And the Chinese-speaking community, of which lots of even our elderly Chinese groups in their 90s are using mobile phones, but not so much for English-speaking Facebook. So we found that through each of those connectors, they were reaching up to, in total, up to 7,000 people. And they were also bringing information back to us, saying that our communications were too boring, that our communications didn't make sense, or that we translated something a bit wrong, which is incredibly great. They also helped our navigators, our staff who are helping personally people to reach services. They helped them to better connect with culturally diverse groups too. So those 8 connectors were a new thing for us, a new way of reaching into our community groups. Other councils might have similar things, but it was really important for us. And the other thing I wanted to talk about at Moreland was creation of jobs. And we were so lucky that the state government granted us, and they granted most local councils in Victoria funds to recruit new people. We were lucky enough to be able to spend $16 million on employing 310 people for 6 months. And they were able to do a whole heap of extra work and injected energy, enthusiasm, positivity into our organisation. Well, they got to work, they got to learn about being in local government, and left a legacy behind them as well. So one of the things I take from that is that people are great, and that in terrible circumstances, people do wonderful things and are very resilient. Another thing that I take from that is that when you spend large amounts of money supporting the community, it works, it makes a difference. And we need to think about that going forward as well. So I'll finish there. Thanks for the opportunity, Chris, and everyone.
Cathy, that was fabulous. And I know there's a lot more you could say, and we'll have questions, I'm sure, about some of what you've talked about. In fact, there's a few things there I think we want to circle back to before the end of the session today. So have a breather. And I'm going to call on Claire and Gail now to set the scene for us about Barking and Dagenham in London, where it's been a very different set of circumstances, I guess, a bit now like what we had last year. I don't know, Cathy, I think I heard Melbourne's lockdown described as the longest in the world, but I'm not sure if that holds true anymore, because you've had a lockdown situation in the UK for some time now, haven't you, Claire and Gail?
Yes, so we've had a lockdown now since Christmas, and we've got a roadmap for recovery, which our Prime Minister talks about quite a lot, which hopefully means by June, life will return back to normal. But obviously we are also celebrating this week, the 23rd, which is the start of our first lockdown last year. So that's a day of reflection on having this for a year. But thank you for asking us to come along. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about Barking and Dagenham. It's an East London borough. Some of you may know it for being famous being the home of Ford Motor Company, which it was for many, many years. It's also the home of the largest social housing estate in Europe. We've got 250,000 residents in 14 square miles, which is only 36 square kilometres. So we're pretty densely packed, and we're just to the right of the Olympic Park for all of those that watched the Olympics back in 2012. So pretty central. 15 minutes on the tube to get into central London. It's interesting to hear about Moreland actually there, Cathy, because we've got an awful lot of, we've got a very diverse community in Barking and Dagenham. We've got a very young community. 60% of our population are actually under 16, and we've got lots of deprivation and lots of poverty. So for us, dealing with that has been a major issue. We're also the largest employer in the area. So we've got about 6,000 staff, which includes all the teachers and people in schools, and about 40% of those live in the borough, so all local people. For us, our story sort of starts in 2014, where we were having to face austerity, and we knew by 2020 we had a budget that was exactly half what we were going to have in 2014. So in the years just before 2020, we completely redesigned our council. We've created a number of commercial entities, so we actually trade as a council, and they're wholly owned by the council, so any profits come back into us, but they're commercial entities. And we set about a whole new structure, whole new way of dealing with our residents. We thought we were flying, and then came March 2020, which sort of stopped us completely in our tracks. And what that did in Barking and Dagenham was all about businesses and people. So if we start on the business side, obviously in March last year, many businesses had to close. We had what we called a furlough scheme, where the government actually stepped in and paid a percentage of people's salary who were unable to work, but it wasn't the full 100%. But an awful lot of businesses closed, and we had an awful lot of people in trouble about that. So we actually had to do an awful lot about providing grants, and the government has given us money for that. Central government have given us money for that. So we've actually issued about £6.1 million worth of grants to over 1,000 businesses. We've got 2,500 businesses we're providing other support from. But the real impact then was on people. We have got huge numbers of people now unemployed or on furlough, where that furlough scheme is going to end very shortly. So the numbers of people on what we call universal credit, which is a benefit for those, that's gone through the roof, and we've got huge numbers of people now on that. And we then spent an awful lot of time trying to help the vulnerable, and actually just listening to some of Cathy's examples, we've followed the same type of route. So we've actually set up what we call BD CAN, which is the Barking and Dagenham Community Action Network, and that was actually going out to help people. So we, for the first time, had to provide food to people. So we were getting volunteers in to help us deliver food, deliver medicines, just keep in touch with people. We were provided with a list of people who were called clinically extremely vulnerable, and they were people who were advised not to leave their houses, and they were effectively in their homes for nearly a year, many of these people. So they had underlying health conditions, which meant it was very risky for them to leave their homes, and we've been providing them with food, support, etc. So we've made over sort of 20,000 calls to individuals. We've got 9,000 people shielding at the moment. That list increased to 17,000, so 17,000 people we've been trying to support, and we've actually got about 400 volunteers now signed up to help that BD CAN. So they've been really, really great. And as we've moved in now to the next phase, where we as a council have set up testing centres. So we have 7 centres around the borough where people can go and get tested. We've got those, we're paying for those to be run. We're also supporting the vaccination drive, where we've actually got volunteers working in centres to help people being vaccinated. And our expectation is that we're going to have to be running those type of centres for at least the next year. So we're already building into our business plans, how will we run testing centres, because currently we're running a couple of them in our leisure centres. Obviously, because we're not allowed to run a leisure centre. When the leisure centres are able to open, where will we run our testing centres from, and where will we run our vaccination centres from as well? But as I say, the issue around that, of course, is I've got 400 volunteers at the moment. When they may go back to work, or when they may find out, how are we going to manage all of that? And for us, this has been a massive financial challenge. the whole of London, although the government has given us grants, in local government, the whole of government is 2 billion adrift. So we have spent 2 billion more than central government have given us. That has left for us, all local authorities, a massive financial trouble, issues. One London borough has already declared, I'll say the word bankruptcy. It's a way that we do our accounting, where they are actually having to say they do not have enough money now to continue. So they've had to actually go through a statutory process. And I know that there are other London boroughs in a very similar situation. So for us, the challenge now is how do we survive? Because whilst we've been dealing with all this pandemic, we've also been dealing with all our social work cases, all the support for children's, adults, etc., which are now going through the roof. Our staff are still working on more. We've actually, sadly, Barking and Dagenham has got the highest rate of domestic violence in the country, and that figure is increasing, along with our concerns about children and adults as well because of lockdown. So our staff have been working on that. So we're trying to make sure that they're supported, but also realise that demand is going to keep coming towards us while I've actually got a budget issue. So picking up my theme of staff, obviously they haven't stopped working. We've got a real issue with the fact that people are now getting very, very tired, and I'm sure that's the same for all of my Australian colleagues. So we have been trying to work out how we can support staff over this period. So I'm going to hand over to my Director of Workforce Change, Gail, to give you a bit of a flavour on that.
Thanks, Claire, and hi everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us to this event this evening. So I think for us it's really about keeping staff safe, keeping the show on the road, maximising flexibility and participation and communication with our staff, because it's been a really big ask. It's nearly a year since many staff were decanted at home, and they have not come out of home since that period. We have decided to keep that sort of control, and at the moment we have got a stay-at-home order from national government anyway, so where people are able to work from home, they're expected to work from home, and that's a sizable number of our workforce. We had been doing a lot of work on new ways of working for a number of years. Claire mentioned about our Ambition 2020 programme, which included new ways of working and new kit, laptops, etc., for people to be able to work from home, so we were able to facilitate that really quickly. We also moved our contact centre at home within basically 2 weeks, installing kit and getting people to be able to be the front door really and provide the services, communication services to residents. So as Claire says, one of the largest local employers, we wanted to make sure that we kept our employees safe as possible, create the conditions to support their well-being. Health and safety and well-being communication and information has been really vital to that, to all of our staff. So whether they're actually out and about in the borough providing vital frontline services, or working from home, supporting the frontline and supporting our core services. So for home workers, we moved very quickly to a life on Teams, and new kit provided to help people work even more productively at home. Chairs, for example, that weren't available before because people were only working occasionally from home. Flexible approach to working hours, particularly those who are parents adapting to homeschooling, which many of our parents have had to do on and off throughout the last year. And then wellbeing support, including counselling, online events, webinars, roadshows, and we've basically moved everything in within a virtual environment. For staff working in the borough, the big focus for us there was on communication engagement and also making sure that we've got absolutely safe, robust systems of work, including a major overhaul of our COVID risk assessments, and they're kept under active review, they're published online, extensive PPE, and regular lateral flow testing for those staff as well to keep them safe. So throughout this, we are quite a heavily unionised organisation. It's been really important for us to engage with trade unions. So we have been meeting weekly with senior leadership and the Director of Public Health with our trade unions to maximise the communication, really to make sure that any issues are brought up on a weekly basis and dealt with really swiftly. That's worked really well. And then we've been doing regular check-in points with surveys with staff. And during all of this, we've actually acquired IIP Gold, international standard, and really recognise that sort of participation and engagement and communication and good leadership, and a huge sense of pride really from our staff in terms of being able to help the organisation, help residents through the pandemic. So the roadmap to ease lockdown is kind of in place, as Claire mentioned. So now we're building on those foundations of participation from staff and engaging staff in more new ways of working, and a much more sophisticated programme around looking at different worker types, redesigning our workspaces, with the first big group of staff going into permanent home working, but also looking at office hubs, collaboration and team zones, and secure bases for social care staff. So we've certainly been listening to our staff around how we can redesign the workspaces that we have, and how we can deliver direct work to residents closer to where residents need that. And alongside that, lots of work on compassionate and collaborative leadership skills, and a continued ongoing focus on wellbeing. Really awful things have happened to our staff, just as it's happened within the community. And so that's where our staff have stepped up, but our leadership has also stepped up to really listen and engage, and to make sure that we've got the right sorts of conversation and communication and interventions. So I think that's all I wanted to say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Can I just get you to clarify, was it IIP Gold you mentioned,
Yeah.
for those who might not know what that is?
In Investors in People, it's an international standard that measures basically culture and leadership against quite a robust standard. We were silver before 3 years ago, so the Investors in People review took place in February, January and February during the lockdown. So we're very, very proud actually to get that accreditation.
Terrific. Catherine, I think you might want to make a comment before I introduce our last speaker.
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Cathy, Claire and Gail, and congratulations to Claire and Gail and your council for achieving that accreditation. That's quite amazing given the environment that you're currently operating within. I know that Linda has a lot to talk about as well in terms of the Hawkesbury experience, and of course not only going into a pandemic situation, but doing so off the back of devastating bushfires. But I did just want to acknowledge Leanna Thompson's comment that she still has, I think, most, if not all of your staff working from home, and have been doing so for the past 12 months. And that would be quite similar for some other councils here in Australia. And one thing just to flag when we get to question and answers after we hear from Linda is to hear perhaps a little bit more about your learnings from the rollout of the vaccination program, because at this stage, particularly in Victoria, councils haven't been engaged to start rolling that out. They are about to. In fact, I was speaking with the Minister for Local Government's advisor today, and there are some briefings being set up in the near future to discuss that with mayors across Victoria. But really keen to hear some of the lessons and learnings that you might share. But anyway, Chris, back to you. And I think it's now Linda's turn to talk to us about Hawkesbury.
It is. Thank you, Catherine, for those comments. And I just encourage our audience to pop your questions and comments into the chat window, because we want to move to those questions after we hear from our final speaker. So Linda, Perrine, thank you for being very patient. I'm sure you've appreciated what our other panellists have had to say. You're at Hawkesbury City Council. You've dealt with bushfires, floods and COVID, and you were telling us tonight you're on flood watch again at the moment. Will it ever end? Tell us a bit about what life's been like in Hawkesbury.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm really honoured to be asked to speak tonight. So, yes, our journey has been, well, quite different. Our COVID experience has been quite different in the Hawkesbury. Yes, we've had job losses. Yes, there's been anxiety and fear within the community. There have been impacts on the economy. But our story really starts with the bushfires from October 2019. Then we threw in a bit of a flood, and then COVID hit. And then obviously people were then saying after that, well, when is the plague? And there was actually a plague of mice going on in New South Wales, the rural regions of New South Wales. It hasn't hit the Hawkesbury yet, and I really hope it doesn't get to us. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk about the bounce back program that we ran for tourist operators as a result of COVID. But I also want to talk about the work that we've been doing and continuing to do with our communities because of the bushfires. But first, I'll talk a bit about the Hawkesbury. It's a peri-urban council. It's the largest geographic council in metropolitan Sydney, but we've only got 67,000 people. We're about an hour drive away from CBD and you know, where we border the Blue Mountains Council. In fact, you know, we've got the Blue Mountains part of our local government area. So we've got some urban, you know, urban areas, certainly not, you know, high rise. You know, when they say it's congested, it's like still like 2-story buildings. But then we've got a lot of rural and remote communities. So the other thing about the Hawkesbury, it's really picturesque, and we have rivers. So it's pouring rain at the moment. So we've got the Hawkesbury River, the McDonald River, and the Cola Rivers, and they are really beautiful and obviously add to the scenic beauty of the area. But when you talk to state agencies like the State Emergency Services, they really are very worried about us because we are the highest flood risk local government area in New South Wales. Okay, so when they say to us, you're on flood alert, they mean you are on flood alert, and they are on flood alert. The other thing about our local government area, about 70% of it is actually national parks, and we are part of the World Heritage listed Blue Mountains. In terms of council itself, we're really different to the other speakers. We've only got 300 on staff. We never have enough money or time or, you know, to do all the things that we want to do. However, one of the key outcomes that we have been working on and keep trying to build, and that is build our community resilience and our community wellbeing. So pre-COVID and pre-bushfires, some of the programs we've been running, you know, supporting medical and social programs to our isolated residents, you know, doing garden maintenance programs to support our aging community so they can stay at home, their gardens are accessible, and they can, you know, they can be comfortable. We've been running a range of wellbeing programs targeting particularly men's mental health. And we've also been facilitating sessions between community agencies, emergency services, and residents as we try and create those resilience networks so that they can be prepared in times of disaster. And you know, unfortunately, we will be having another flood in the Hawkesbury, and you know, I'm actually dreading, you know, how bad that can be. So let me take you back to October 2019. I've never worked in a council before where I had a direct responsibility for dealing with, you know, bushfires. I've never had staff have their out of office measures saying, I'm busy out fighting bushfires. It was all new to me. But this was a horrendous fire. Across New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory, we lost 13 million hectares of land was burnt, okay? For us, the Gospers Mountain and Grossfell fire burnt for 79 days consecutively. And even though the fire is out, obviously, particularly with this rain, we're still dealing with the ramifications of the fire. Okay, so this is well and truly over 12 months, we're still dealing with the ramifications. Okay, so then we had the fire, then we had a flood, and then COVID hit. Okay, so the issue for our community when COVID hit, they were really concerned that particularly the fire impacted residents, that they would be forgotten. Okay, they were struggling. They were saying, my house is gone, my shed's gone with all of my equipment, you know, there's trees that are damaged everywhere, and now, you know, COVID is, you know, hit us, and they were thinking, oh my God, no, council's going to forget us. Because, and I really, the words that you know, about council being the voice or the source of truth is really, really true. They looked to us to give them all of the information that was coming out from the state government or any state agencies or anything. So we had to continue delivering a lot of those programs that I've already talked about. So yes, essential services to isolated residents, the garden maintenance program. We did change the wellbeing program. So we've actually had to flip it a little bit to focus on trauma recovery and the importance of connection. Other resources that we might normally put into community events, for instance, were changed and channeled into supporting more critical services such as food relief and domestic violence services. We also started doing other community capacity building projects which are more localised to create social connectedness, and did good neighbour initiatives. And we obviously created an emergency dashboard, and that's proven to be really, really successful. We wouldn't have been able to do any of this though if we didn't have, government grants, because again, our budget's really tight. And as I said, we've only got a small number of staff. But out of the bushfires and what we're still dealing with now, the most important thing that our community is saying to us is they want us to help remove the dangerous trees. When I talk about stress, these people are afraid to walk on their properties because there's still so many trees around that are damaged. They say when they sleep at night, they hear really loud cracks as more branches fall or they sort of explode, and their stress levels are really high. So, yes, they want us to run these programs, and yes, they want us to kind of be out there talking to them and listening, but they're basically saying, can you just come and cut down these trees or get rid of them, because it is just too awful kind of living in their own space, which is not a very nice place to be in. So that's bushfires, and we've been doing a lot, and we'll continue doing a lot around that. So now in relation to COVID, yes, as a council, I've got to say, we weren't ready as a council. We were not a mobile workforce at all. A handful of us had laptops, our IT systems weren't ready, and yet we're in a situation now with the state government saying, okay, where possible, work from home. And so the executive, we're scrambling, thinking, oh my goodness, all right, what do we do here? So we kicked people out of the building. Here's your equipment, take what you've got, we'll try and set up the IT systems. And as you can imagine, the first couple of months were really clunky, really slow, lots of complaints. But, eventually things kicked in and got smoother and it got better. And now, obviously, 12 months on, people would never want to go back to the way things were, which is a really good place to put us, because we're now in a position where we're ready for the next problem. And as I said, the next problem for us is probably going to be a flood. But we now have a mobile workforce that we are connected, and we actually know and can keep delivering services. I just want to talk about the business community. So the Hawkesbury, tourism is one of the key economic drivers in our local government area. And obviously with COVID, a lot of the businesses were, forced to close down or rethink what they were doing. Some businesses boomed, I have to be honest, because people couldn't travel overseas, they were looking locally, and Hawkesbury is not that far away. So they were coming to visit some of our tourist sites, but other tourist operators still weren't quite with it. So we developed what we call the Bounce Back program. This program was about having one-on-one mentoring, okay, and therefore creating a tailored approach with each business operator that participated. So with the mentor, they essentially sat down with that business, they reviewed their business performance pre-bushfires and COVID to get a really good understanding of, how they've been traveling. And then they worked through a set of 5 sessions with that mentor with their own specific plan, their tailored plan. These one-on-one sessions were then supported by a series of webinars on key topics such as demystifying the marketing or social media. Now, I know I'm not a social media guru at all, but in terms of, if you're running a business, you kind of make these assumptions that people know how to do marketing and media and, look at tax and all that kind of stuff. But it was really fascinating when you took these operators back to basics, that they really needed to go back to basics and rethink, could they be looking at doing things differently? So there was a whole series of very practical webinars that were provided to them. We also had a concierge hotline, okay? So the businesses could call in between their sessions. And I've got to say, these probably acted like a bit of a counselling session. It was a touch point, where they can say, look, I'm trying this, it's not working, do I need to tweak it? What can I do? And that was really, that provided that ongoing support between their sessions. They also, there was a private Facebook group created with these businesses that were participating, so they could share information between each other, and they could access other information. And what we're seeing is those people have actually created, good business-to-business networking, which is fantastic, because that's exactly what you want. And now, in terms of tourism package, we can see that they're getting together and, instead of saying, oh, look, I've got this great thing, they're saying, I've got this great thing. And then if you can also join in with this other activity that this other business has got. And then around that again, we also ensured they had access to a broader network of subject matter experts. Okay, so this program proved to be really successful. As I said, it was one of a number of business programs that we did. And I just want to share with you some comments that came back to council. We at the end of the program, we did a bit of celebration and kind of graduation. And we had one guy who said, look, I want to express my deepest gratitude to council for supporting local businesses through bushfires and flood and COVID. Without the collaborative support from council and the business mentoring program, I wouldn't be in business today. And another person said, the business bounce back program has been fantastic in supporting me through the reopening of my business, especially after experiencing the double whammy of loss from bushfire, followed by closure from COVID-19. The assistance I've received, especially in the area of marketing, has been truly invaluable. So I just want to say that we're continuing, obviously, to run our community wellbeing. We're really trying to push on to build the resilience of our community, because only through that can we actually keep surviving these various, whatever, nature's going to throw at us. And in terms of business support, we'll keep trialing things. And the other thing I want to say, I was in a session the other day where we were talking about failing forward, okay? And the language around being in government, we've got to be prepared to try things and fail and learn from it and not be scared of it. And I think that's something that, I've really learned at the Hawkesbury, because we have tried a lot of things and they haven't quite worked, but a lot of other things have worked. And we've got to be prepared to kind of admit a failure and say, well, what could we have done differently? And then just keep plowing forward. Thank you very much.
Linda, that was fabulous. And in fact, all of our speakers, absolutely terrific scene setting, great stories, the challenges that you've all dealt with in the past year. Nobody would have seen this coming a year or 2 years ago. And the resilience right across the sector, across the world, I think shines through in what you've demonstrated to us this evening. I know we've got some great questions coming from the audience. We want to make sure we get to as many of those as possible. So Catherine, I'm going to throw to you to moderate some Q&A now.
Great, thanks for that, Chris. And Linda, I've just got to say, what an extraordinary story and so well articulated. Thank you for taking us through what must be and still is just a very difficult journey for the Hawkesbury community. As I say, as Chris has said, extraordinary presentations from all of our panellists tonight. Thank you so much. Perhaps if I go to Leanna Thompson's question, Leanna, would you like to speak to that? I think we're small enough that we can accommodate people from the floor actually asking their question if they would like to.
Sure, thank you, Catherine. So really, I'm picking up on this question of change creating opportunities. So really, can each of you tell me about what it is that you're going to leave behind in 2020 and do differently?
I suppose one of the things that we're going to be leaving behind are our buildings. So we're starting to look at how we work differently. We've got 2 big office in Barking. One of them definitely is where it's closed now, and it will remain closed, I think. And actually people realising we've had a strapline for a long time, which is work is what we do, not where we do it. This has really forced that through, and people now really thinking about how they really want to work. And I, as an individual, I cannot see why I would ever go and sit in an office just to do my emails. We used to have rows and rows of desks where people used to just sit there doing. Why are we doing that? Why we want to go back into offices is to collaborate, to have a brainstorming session, to train, to induct, things like that. So we're starting to talk about that's why you would go into a building, and then what does that building look like? So it's not rows of desks. And bearing in mind, we spent a fortune updating our town hall fairly recently. So this is a big step for us. But yeah, what will those buildings really look like? What will the space look like? And we're looking at that. And I think those days of you know, certainly for the majority of people coming in 9 to 5 into a building, I think that's going to be left behind, and we're going to work in a very, very more flexible and different way for the future.
Great example, Claire. Cathy, have you thought of something you want to leave in the past?
So, I mean, I think it's made us think about our workforce so much, haven't we? And so in addition to all those huge benefits of sort of more creativity and saving time, one of the things we've all rejoiced in, I think, is the really great parts of being family friendly. And I remember a staff member saying to me that they'd gained back I think 2 hours in commute time by being able to work from home, and they directly spent that additional 2 hours with their primary school child, which is just amazing, and that's really great. I think the other thing that's interesting about leaving behind is, so we did have to shut or reduce lots of services. Some of the services we reduced, you know, everyone survived reducing those services, and in theory, maybe you could use the savings from that to put into more urgent services, for instance, supporting mental health or supporting jobs and employment. Our community is keen still to see the same level of service and everything that they had before the pandemic. I think they're keen to have normal. And so I think that's a tricky thing, particularly in Australia, and perhaps even more so in the UK, where we're really, really hunting for money to try and balance the books at the moment. It's really hard. So those are the things that I think of.
Good examples, Cathy. I'm wondering, Gail, on that family-friendly line, and you're in the people and culture business, is there anything in particular that you would add in terms of the way you manage people going forward?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think this becomes a whole different way of operating and working. I think we were already doing stuff around people working from home some of the time if they had jobs that allowed them to do that. But I think there was always a bit of a challenge with that from managers, some managers finding it harder and to let go and that trust. And I think that, you know, going back to one of the questions about, you know, accelerated change, well, it just wiped that straight away, probably for all of us, that all of those feelings that you have to put them to one side. So I certainly think that we have been living a massive experiment in how that operates in the future. And there's no going back, absolutely no going back. Productivity was great. We kept the show on the road, etc., etc. So I think that's, and people have really risen up and really excelled in terms of that challenge. I think the isolation that people feel when you're in lockdown is really hard, and I think so leaving that behind in terms of 2020 and as we emerge out through 2021 will be really important. So we're still experimenting, we're still testing stuff, but I think, you know, having the support around you and family and friend around you and social things to be able to do actually really changes your work-life balance too. So I think this is when we really start to embrace a very different way of working flexibly in a much more normal, if you want to say normal, environment. And I think it's been really hard up until now because it's been so curtailed. However, people have really excelled, and people have found different things that they can do with and I think Claire mentioned about people working too many hours, and I think sometimes some of that is around there's nothing else to do or very little else to do. So I think the big challenge in the people space is around working in this environment and thriving. So this isn't right for everybody, and it's about inclusive design principles, and it's about thinking about people from an individual point of view and listening and seeing what we can put in place. So we want people to thrive, not just work, and to tolerate this massive change that everyone's gone through.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Gail. And Linda, finally, what do you want to leave behind?
Look, our organisation has gone through a massive change. When I first started there was no discussion around, you know, workplace flexibility or working from home. It just wasn't existing. And I remember when, you know, before kicking the bodies out of the building, pulling my staff together and said, look, this is an opportunity, make it work, you know, because I'd worked flexibly in a whole bunch of other jobs before coming to the Hawkesbury, and so I felt like I'd walked back in time a little bit. So when we did kick people out, and I kept checking in on them, and they were absolutely, once they got over the IT problems, absolutely thriving. And so now we're beginning to bring people back in 2 days a week, and some are coming up 3 days a week. and you can see the conversation is, that's enough. I don't want to be, and I don't need to be in the office any more than 2 or 3 days a week. I'm being really productive. I get to see my family. I get to take the dog for a walk. I get to cook dinner, and then I can hop on a computer at the same time and do my emails. I'm working flexibly and I'm being far more productive. And I'm just like, thank goodness for that, because I've got to say, people at first, when I was talking to them about it, saying, oh, how will you know I'm doing my work? I'm like, well, of course I'll know you'll be doing your work, because, development applications are being processed, and, queries are being answered. We look at outcomes. We want to look at outcomes, not whether you're sitting on your bottom in front of a computer for 8 hours, because you're not necessarily being productive, are you? So now, 12 months on, you can see people have changed their thinking, and that's so fantastic, and we've still got, places to go, because it is difficult for some managers who, have found it harder to, it's a trust environment you've got to create. But I'm so happy to leave behind that old way of working and really working with our staff and really embracing, and so happy that we can be looking at, hot desking and creating spaces for engagement and collaboration, as opposed to, this is your desk and this is where you stay, and you don't go and, deal with other people. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things I'm ready to leave behind. But I've also got to say, this way of working has really worked well with me. I'm one of the strongest introverts you will ever meet in your life. And this has really helped keep my sanity.
Thank you, Linda, for that, and also for others for addressing that question. And Andy, I'm not sure if you want to talk a little more on that accelerated issue that you raised, but I guess just from the Victorian Local Governance Association's perspective, I mean, what we're experiencing tonight is the result of accelerated change and the way that we collaborate with other partners such as LG Pro and also LGiU, and we've got this terrific opportunity to have global discussions like we're having tonight. We launched our VLGA Connect platform this time last year, and 148 episodes in, plus a number of live panels, including this one, that we're now doing in collaboration with others. I think the opportunity for collaboration is greater, and also therefore the way in which we can support the local government sector in all of the work that you do is increased as well. I think that there's a terrific question that's just come through from Katrina Stevenson, if I've got that correct. And she's asked, how do you ensure equity between those staff whose jobs can be relocated to home and those who can't? And I guess this is something that all of you would be dealing with.
Yeah, this is really hard. In Moreland, we sent about 600 staff home to do their work from home, which left about 500 full-time and part-time staff doing their work in the field or on site. At the beginning, I think the staff working on site were quite jealous of the people working from home. But then by Melbourne's second lockdown, there are a lot of people working from home who are really jealous of those going to work outside. And so that's hard, really hard. And it was just because the second lockdown was so hard for Melburnians, so very challenging. We just ended up using different horses for different courses. And so our mental health webinars, for instance, that we had a series of were great for people working at home and really important. We established a parents group for the people going crazy homeschooling. For people in the field, we, whilst observing public health restrictions, would provide lunch and a sense of reward and thank you. We just tried to thank staff all the time, because just by turning up, they were doing a great thing. There was a sense also, those essential workers, they were risking themselves. But there was a bit of pride in being an essential worker as well, I think. And that was interesting in lockdown 3, which was only 5 days in Melbourne, where fewer people were classed as essential, and that felt funny to people that had been essential that were no longer essential. So it was quite an interesting thing.
We don't have a solution. We're still grappling with it. So yeah, just in my department alone, I had staff who were, office staff, and yes, they were able to work from home. Then I have a whole bunch of other staff who are, waste pickup drivers. They can't do that from home. People inspecting, doing site inspections or, those kind of things. They can't do that from home. But I suppose really I was just having really upfront conversations that people were still working. It didn't matter what location they were in, they were still working. And then, and then I said to them, so what do they need, particularly the outdoor guys? What do you need to do to make you feel like you're being valued? Because it came down to discussion around, we seem to value them differently, which we didn't, but obviously there was perception there. So some of them said to me, okay, well, can I go from home straight to the side, and when I finish, go home? I'm like, yes, why not? Because you've got your mobile tablet and, you've got all the data that you need. And yes, of course you can do that. So slowly, like, they were engaging in, discussion around what they needed. And then it became more about flexibility as opposed to working from home or working in the office. And that became more important for them because they felt restricted, that they were 9 to 5 and everyone else was doing whatever they wanted. Whereas, so saying, well, no, it's actually, for some things, a site meeting is a site meeting. You're going to do that, when it meets the client or the applicant or whatever. But outside of that, you can do things more flexibly, and that kind of helped soften things. But we're still dealing with it. I mean, our customer service team, they're in the office and they don't like it. So that I've still got to say it's not 100% hunky-dory by any means, but it's something that we're still grappling with, because I don't think we'll ever go back to that point where everyone is in the office. So we just actually have to keep plowing through.
Thank you, Linda. I don't know if or Gail wants to add into that. Is that something you've grappled with yet in terms of, how you come out of your current phase with people at home, people in the office, etc., or on site?
I think I'll start, and I don't know if Claire wants to say anything, but I think I think it's a really good point. I think that we've always had a two-tier workforce, or perceptions of a two-tier workforce, really. And actually it's probably more than that, because we've got lots of different roles. So we've got staff that are out and about on refuse and street cleansing, but we've also got social workers and others doing direct work, and we've got others in care homes, for example. So a whole range of different, and enforcement doing, really vital jobs. I think some of you have talked about that sort of trust and flexibility, but it's also about the communication and respect and pride in the job. And also we were getting quite a lot of great comments from our residents about the services that people had received during lockdown, and then our staff became local heroes. And so there was lots and lots of communication fed back to across our workforce and across Facebook, etc., just really recognizing that's what our residents were saying about people. So I think that's really important. But we've also, as part of the Dispersed Working Programme, we're also looking at redesigning some of our other workplaces and spaces to do them up and make them much more sort of fit for purpose. So it isn't all about, and also communication, because some of the staff have got very limited access to IT, who are out and about in some of our public realm services. So we're also looking at that as well. But it is a slow game. But I think this is where, using the pandemic and the experience that we've had around toolbox talks and communication with staff, I think this actually gets us into a much better place. Thank
you, Gail, for that. Jeanette, I'm not sure if you want to talk to your question. I'm not sure if I'll capture the nuances, but that's fine if you don't. Basically, Jeanette's put something in the chat that talks about perhaps the experience of younger workers in terms of working from home may not be as positive as we've I guess expressed tonight. I think that's an interesting consideration. Andy, you had a question about communities' expectations of local government and whether that's changed as a result of COVID. Did the panel have any thoughts, or Andy, was there something you wanted to add to that question?
Not really, no. It's just that things have changed a lot in terms of the relationship between local authorities and their communities. We got some clues around the way that sort of translation services have been accelerated, for example. And I know there's a much greater emphasis on an understanding of, for example, mental health issues within the community. and the local authorities getting involved in that, which is sort of a new space. So I'm just wondering what the panel think about, okay, the pandemic has actually changed what people expect of us as local authorities, and we're going to have to adjust to that.
One of the things that I found really interesting, 60% of our workforce actually live in the Hawkesbury, which is not unusual for peri-urban councils or regional councils. But prior to the COVID, prior to the pandemic, our council meetings were all in the chamber, you know, so if you wanted to look at a council meeting, or you actually had to come to the meeting physically. And as I said, our local government area is really big. So, you know, if you're living up at St Albans, it's a 2-hour drive and a ferry trip. You know, you're not going to do that to come to a council meeting. So here we are all of a sudden using YouTube to do our council meetings. And we found that, you know, obviously the number of people who are now logging in and watching items and watching the drama of council has increased, which is a really good thing, particularly as we're coming into a local council election this year in September. But more importantly, what I found is I've had a lot more staff comment on council meetings and what's going on, and then asking me questions around what's going on. So this has actually been really good for people to see and participate in democracy of their own local government area, whereas up until this point, they really didn't. Even though they worked for council, they had no clue what was going on half the time. So this has been great, actually, seeing that evolve.
Great example, Linda. Cathy?
I think there's lots of examples of this, and great to hear from the Hawkesbury. I think in open space, in public expectations of open space, that has certainly changed. And to reference a couple of other councils, so in Melbourne, for instance, in a neighbouring council, Dagenham, the golf courses couldn't be used for golf, and so people took over the golf courses for exercise and socialising at a time when the only place you're allowed to socialise was public open space. And so that's hard. And there's another park in Albert Park in Melbourne where, because the schools were off for ages, residents got used to having the park to themselves with no school students at lunchtime. And now there's issues now about how that park's being used, which the council has resolved in favour of the students, I think. So that will stick with us. People loved public space before, and it's even more important to them now and precious.
Excellent example. I'll just look to Claire or Gail if they have anything to add. It's fine if you don't. Claire?
I was just the open spaces comments is amazing. We've had a lot of people use our open spaces. I think for me, the expectation is going to be more around can we get the level of service that we got before? And I think, as has already been mentioned, with the budget constraints we see coming, I think there will be services that we will not be providing, which members of the public will say, but you used to, and we're going to be saying, no, we're not. And I think there's also now, because of the support we gave that we never did before, like providing food and all the softer support, there may be a request for that to continue, and we're going to have to say, actually, that can't when we move out of the pandemic. So I think we're going to have a lot more conversations with our communities about what the council is really about and what we can deliver as we move forward. So I think expectations will change.
And I guess on that point, Claire, what is the role of the central government perhaps in picking up or funding some of those services that the community still do need or perceive to need to be delivered? Look, I'm really conscious of the time, and we could probably talk for a lot longer. Steve, I know you had a question in the chat, which you can talk to, because I couldn't even begin to try to, I guess, go through that. So please, last question, over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Catherine. It might be a quick one and possibly more directed at Claire and Gail, given where you're at on vaccination program. I was contemplating whether the transition to people being vaccinated creates sort of two classes of people, those who have and those who haven't been vaccinated, and whether for staff and communities that's required any rethinking about how services are delivered.
So this is a really big issue, actually. So for us, the whole rollout of the vaccine is actually fundamentally about a health inequality issue. And in London, health inequality is massive. So in different boroughs, if you are living in a different borough of London, you could actually live 10 years longer than you will live in Barking and Dagenham, because the endemic health inequalities we have in our area. Add on to that in rolling out the vaccine, we are clearly seeing hesitancy and refusing in certain communities. And unfortunately, some of those communities are our ethnic minorities and some of our more deprived areas as well. So what we're really worried about is that those health inequalities will actually just exacerbate and just get worse and worse. They're already, so the government's rollout programme, interestingly, it was a government's rollout programme, but we're having to help deliver it, as ever. The rollout programme was very much focused into different tiers, and those tiers were really based on, to be absolutely blunt, whether you would cause a pressure on the NHS. So effectively, if you're getting COVID was going to get you into hospital and into an intensive care unit, you were going to be vaccinated first. Which makes logical sense when you're thinking about planning for resources. But if you are a teacher or a policeman or somebody who's dealing with other care, you were not on the top of that list. So there was a huge lot of communication that needed to go out to all our communities to explain the tiering system. Then when we did start looking at the like the top tiers, why were certain people not going? So why weren't we getting 100%? And that's when we started to see that certain communities were not going to be vaccinated, and therefore we had to do a lot of communication to encourage them. So I think as the process rolls out, we will find there will be inequality. What does that mean in terms of whether we deliver services or whether you're employed? So we're already having people like care homes saying, you know, and a plumbing company actually saying, you know, no jab, no job. What does that mean in the future? Is that allowable? What do we think about that in terms of human rights, freedom of choice, blah, blah, blah. So there's this whole load of issues that are sort of coming to the fore. At the moment, vast majority of people want to be vaccinated, so they see it as a way of getting out of lockdown and easing restrictions. But I think there's going to be lots of questions later on about, have we got everybody? And what exactly, as you say, how will it impact on your life further down the line? You know, again, your point about inequality, we're expecting middle class people will all go for the vaccine because they want to go on holiday abroad in the next year. Our poorer community, you know, will they ever be able to travel again if they don't have the vaccine? So it's a really big issue.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Steve, for that question. Chris, I'll hand back to you now to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And look, thank you to all of our panellists this evening. I think that's been a discussion that has covered more ground and got more insight, I think, than we ever hoped we might be able to achieve this evening. And thank you to the participants for the comments that are coming through in the chat, which is much appreciated. Can I please formally thank Claire, Symonds and Gail Clark from London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, Cathy Henderson from Moreland City Council, and Linda Perrine from Hawkesbury City Council for your contributions this evening. It has been terrific. Thank you, Andy Johnson from LGiU and Catherine Arndt from VLGA. And Liana Thompson here on behalf of LG Pro as well for the collaborative opportunity to bring this to our audience. There will be a recording of today's session available on the VLGA Connected channel, which is on YouTube. The trick with this one is there will be a personalised link sent out to those who've registered to access this as a member benefit. But while you're there, subscribe to the rest of the VLGA Connect offerings of episodes and podcasts to keep in touch with issues from around the local government sector. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great evening if you're in Australia, and I guess you folks have a day of work ahead of you. Enjoy your day in the UK, and thank you all for joining us.